Welcome to 5 Dubs by MDDC Press. I'm your host, Rebecca Snyder, the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, and DC Press Association, which represents news media in our region. 5 Dubs focuses on the who, what, when, where, and why of local news media. We'll talk with the journalists about the stories behind the news. You can find more information about our guests in the show notes or on our website, www.5-dubs.com. Welcome. We're here today with Geordie Wilson, the publisher of the Frederick News Post in Frederick, Maryland. Geordie, it's great to see you.
Well, hi, Rebecca. Thank you.
Yeah. So tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit about the Frederick News Post. Some of it's obvious that it's in Frederick, Maryland, but tell us a little bit about the publication and the media company.
Well, great. We are a traditional community newspaper serving Frederick, the city, and Frederick, the county. We're fortunate to be the only circulating daily newspaper really in Frederick County. And we've been here. The Frederick News Post is the inheritor of a tradition that goes back about 140 years this year, actually. We're celebrating our 140th anniversary. And so, of course, this being Frederick and this being 2023, we're going to brew a beer
Nice.
with a local brewer. And so it'll be a red ale called Red All Over. And that'll celebrate our 130th anniversary.
That's so on brand for you all, because I remember coming out to the Frederick News Post, and I know Will Randall, the Randall family, seemed very interested in brewing beer, but you also have a podcast called Uncapped, and so that seems very much in the milieu for you, and also kind of non-traditional, which is also in some ways kind of traditional for the Frederick News Post, because you are you're a really innovative organization in many respects, and you have to cover a lot of little towns and areas in a way that some of our larger publications in the membership, they're just covering one entity, but Frederick County has a lot of little bits and pieces. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a pretty big county. I mean, it's an interesting place. So the city of Frederick has about 30% of the population of the county is pretty much right in the city, but it's I think the largest county in Maryland, and it does, as you say, it has a bunch of towns, sort of a dozen sort of significant communities scattered around. Makes it a really fun place to do journalism. It also has a lot of different strands of history and culture in the community. It's still largely a agricultural county in form, and there's still a significant agricultural business throughout the county. But at the same time, it's the home of the research labs for the National Cancer Institute and Fort Detrick, and all that they do to support different kinds of biological research. And there's the AstraZeneca plant here just up the street from us. So there's a big community, a big biotech community, a growing computer tech community. So it's very cutting edge in a lot of ways. And yet still, every fall, what you smell is the harvest and the fertilizers. And it's just, we're surrounded by agriculture. And all of these different communities throughout the county give us, a lot of great opportunities for stories, all different kinds of people to reflect.
So now, how do you manage sort of that sort of pull towards the really traditional and the push towards that breaking edge, cutting edge kind of technology? How have you seen that play out either in your coverage or how you even run the organization?
Well, I'd like to say we do it really intentionally, but I think, we do the best we can. One of the things that's always interested me about our audience and our readership and the community that we speak to is, despite the fact that Frederick is the fastest growing county in the state, and it has been a super fast growing county ever since the 270 came up here in the late 50s, early 60s. It sort of doubled every 20 years, the population. So it's been a really, really had transformational growth for a couple of generations. but our core readership remains surprisingly rooted in long-term Frederick residents. And I think this
Mm.
is, this is a challenge really of community newspapers and community journalism everywhere is the audience for our kind of traditional community coverage is long-term residents. It's the people who have roots here. It's the people who have
Mm.
community here and family members here, and who care about the kinds of things that kind of make up a traditional community newspaper's coverage. And we think a lot that, it's easy to think that, oh well, in this sort of growing area with all of these kind of affluent, educated people moving in and living in these picture perfect houses all around Frederick, that they're of course going to want to come in and support the local newspaper. But it's hard to attract them. I mean, especially in this current digital age, educated, affluent people have a lot of different news sources. And if they don't have that habit of interest in what's happening here in Frederick, it can be hard for us to reach them with our message of local journalism. So I'm always surprised at how traditional and conservative and there's a new Frederick and an old Frederick, and
Mm.
we have to be very, very mindful that for all of the glitz and glamour, if you will, such as it is, of the newer Frederick with the fancy restaurants and the breweries and wineries and all, our bread and butter is really the people who have spent a long time here and are really invested in the community. And
Mhm.
so I don't, like I said at the beginning, I don't know that we are all that consciously working to balance out how we reflect these different aspects of it. Um, but that is the trick, is to reflect the interests and sensibilities of the long-term residents while also inviting in and being meaningful to the newcomers and the new energy that's coming into the community of all different races and
Mhm.
backgrounds and activities.
And I always find it so interesting that when you talk to a segment of the population and they say, "Oh, well, of course I read the news. I read the news every day." And when you ask, "Well, what are you reading?" It's all national news.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's sort of how just the world has evolved, but I've always been of the mind that the most important decisions in your life happen at the local level because they impact your life in a much more significant way than what is happening in Washington D.C. And I think people sometimes really miss out on what's happening in their local community and then are surprised when, like that development comes up or their property taxes goes up. Um, and so are the what do you think of is that just sort of society or is that generational? What do you think?
Well, it's not exactly I don't think it's a new phenomenon. It is always disappointing, I think, to those of us who hold great stock in the value of locally informed journalism and just think it's really, really matters. I remember when I was working up in New Hampshire, and when we, had really good penetration. So this 20 years ago, really kind of before the wheels came off the train or the tracks, as you will. And the big story for months and months and months was how the city was moving to a pay-as-you-go trash system, right? And you
Uh-huh.
would have to buy bags, these purple bags for $5 or whatever, put them on the street. And we wrote story after story after story. I mean, the coverage was wall to wall for months. It was a big deal. And then when it actually happened, there were like all these people putting out their trash cans. It's like, I mean, now that may not be the greatest example of really impactful local events. I mean, it is just trash and people
It's
figure it
all
out
about the
quickly.
trash.
But it's kind of remarkable that something like that was covered so extensively in the paper, uh, people just didn't even know. They weren't even aware, and they completely missed out. They had no idea that was happening. And so I don't know. There's a lot of lessons I can take away from that. One is that sometimes we, I think, focus on things that are sort of traditional news, but may not be all that captivating,
Mhm.
and really that the traditional sort of accountability journalism, government oriented journalism, the big J journalism that we grew up in, and ascribe to and that, see as our constitutionally mandated mission may not always be what really matters to our readers and potential readers, and that
Mhm.
we have to work harder to find the stories that connect at a community level, and I think that's a constant challenge. That it's very easy to fall back on the broccoli journalism or
Right.
the accountability journalism, and it's much harder to find the stories below the the meetings or outside of the meetings. So it's really happening in the community, and to tell those stories. And if we can do that, I think we can connect with people a little bit more profoundly.
Sure. So it's sort of being more relevant to your community by highlighting what they're really in, by following their lead. And
Yeah.
so I think one of the last times I was in your newsroom, I saw your audience stats and sort of what stories were trending and what were getting the most hits and things like that. And I thought that was fairly unusual for a publication in a sort of smaller market. I feel like you've really gone not like unnecessarily deep, but you've really been able to harness some of the technology out there to serve readers better. So, could you talk a little bit about how you go about finding those stories and then following up on stories that really matter to you, to your community?
Well, I think I would really defer to to our editors, who we have right at currently a couple of the greatest editors you could possibly ask for, and Graham Cullen and Andy, and I think they bring a great balance of curiosity and groundedness in how they're leading our sort of small team, and to me it's both the hardest thing and the most rewarding thing, and in some ways the simplest thing. It comes down to curiosity and
Hmm.
openness, and curiosity and communication and dialogue with your community. And I think we're blessed to have great editing staff in particular that provides that connection to the community, that so that we have the people coming forward and bringing us great story ideas and talking to us, and that they are able to work with the amazing cohort of reporters that we have
Hmm.
here right now. So, I don't know that there's any great secret sauce, but I really do think it just comes down to being curious and
Hmm.
open and in dialogue with your community. I should talk a little bit, I think, about what I see happening here right now. Is I'm really excited about the quality and kind of journalism that our team is doing these days. Um, like every newspaper in in this country, our staffing has gone down over the last 12 or so years that I've been here pretty substantially, and that does diminish the scope of our ambitions
Hmm.
and the volume of our coverage. But on the other hand, I think what I'm seeing happen right now is that this paper, as a solid daily paper with a good local franchise in an exciting community with some digital ambitions, is an attractive place to work. And so I think we are finding an interesting niche in the industry where we're trying to establish ourselves as a growth opportunity for young journalists. And I think
Hmm.
that's a really worthwhile niche. It requires having editors that like and know how to work with people who are beginning their career, and it requires constantly rebooting and retraining and relearning, as reporters come through, work here for a few years, get to do great work, and then hopefully find greater opportunities elsewhere as well. So it's a great model, I think, for kind of revitalizing, keeping a newsroom vital and constantly reinventing itself. And I think Andy and Graham are doing a really good job of leading that. So
Well, and I know our MDDC interns, of course, the Press Foundation hosts, runs an internship program where students are hosted at area newsrooms, and the Frederick News Post has been a wonderful host and supporter. And many of those students I know go on to work in your newsrooms and then sort of get raptured up to larger
right.
places or different areas.
Yeah. Well, there's been
And
so much change in the industry where I think it's I mean, heck, there are papers nowadays. There is no more newsroom, right? I mean, that's common,
Right.
and the ecosystem that used to nurture journalists has really been degraded, I think, in recent years. And so we're in some ways a little bit of a throwback, although I don't think we're antediluvian here. We're not we're not archaic, but we have a fairly traditional model, and we should talk at some point about the ownership company here, because they are really committed to print journalism and community journalism, and maintaining an independent, locally focused newsroom of substance. Our staffing is nowhere near what it was, but we have a pretty good sized staff that's still able to take on ambitious projects, and that
Hmm.
is increasingly rare and hard to find. And for it's got to be tough to want to do good journalism and to look at the landscape and try to find a place where you're going to be able to do ambitious work, and with the support of a newsroom and editors that know how to guide you and help you to reach your potential. I mean, I think it would be daunting to be a 20-something coming out of school and trying to join this industry, and I think we are fortunate to be able to offer a great environment here for people to do good work.
Well, absolutely. And I feel like, as if one is a sort of young, early in career reporter, you kind of have to look after your own support systems. And that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons we, create our internship program the way we do. And with the new, I guess it's not so new, ownership of the Ogden newspaper group, the Frederick News Post, the Randall family had owned it for probably 130 of that 140 years.
134 years, I think. I think that was it. Yeah. Because, yeah, I was just thinking about this the other day. It feels still like it's been kind of a new thing. There was this sort of 3-year interregnum there where we were all kind of went to our corners for a little while. But it wasn't long before the pandemic that we were the Randall family, which had owned this paper for, as you said, about 134 years, under continuous ownership. I think I was either the first. They weren't sure. I may have been the first non-family member to be publisher here.
Oh.
There's some thought that there might have been somebody back in like the 1880s or 90s. I don't know, but anyway, nobody could remember for sure. So I'll take that mantle. So but yeah, it's been very closely held by one family for over a century, and then the sort of ravages of the industry and the challenges of operating as a small one site company,
Very difficult.
it's just unsustainable.
Mhm.
Especially, we have a huge commercial printing operation here and a big printing facility, and that while there's a certain diversity of revenue that comes from that, a little bit of business diversity, it also brings with it kind of extraordinary business risk, financial
Oh,
risk,
right. That was a
because
huge outlay of capital to
yeah.
create
I mean,
that
at
press.
any day you could lose a folder and you could be faced with a couple $1 million of something
Mhm.
that is just not sustainable for a family run paper that's kind of as challenged as everybody else. So anyway, the Randalls, who were great stewards of this company for so many years, they in 2017 sold to Ogden newspapers, about which at the time I knew very, very little. They're a very sort of privately held company. They don't really seek the spotlight. They operate in smaller communities throughout Ohio and Pennsylvania, a number of papers. But it too is a closely held, family-owned newspaper company that just happens to operate at a very different scale now.
Mhm.
And the family has done quite well and has a number of other interests, but at heart they are still they started out in Wheeling, West Virginia, is where they in 1890, I think, is when their family started operating newspapers, and it's still the same family there that has owned it ever since 1890. They've in recent decades they've expanded, bought up other papers, and have just been a great, I think, landing place for
Mhm.
this company. Their commitment to community journalism and local control, has been great. We have had a remarkable degree of freedom in how we operate, which is not typical, I think, of many chain corporate ownership
Right.
structures. So it's worked out really well for Frederick and I think for the paper. I mean, especially as you look around the industry, family papers that have been sold into more aggressive newspaper
Right. Well,
companies.
but I think like that's what keeps local journalism so like that local control, your ability to make decisions about what's right for your community. That's at
Yeah,
the heart of local journalism because you can't, you can replicate some systems and you can take advantage of some
right.
economies of scale. And it also provides obviously a great launching pad for some of your reports. You need to make sure to reflect the community that you serve and be able to draw out those individual stories. And so I think tactically that's so smart of Ogden to keep that kind of control when it might be easier just to say, oh, we're going to run that content across everything and
Yeah.
just,
Oh, it's a constant temptation, right? I think we're definitely engaged in a project of sort of consolidating and collaborating. I now help oversee a sort of a regional group of papers.
Mhm.
We're the only one in the MDDC, so the others don't matter.
Mhm.
But we have been working hard to bring ourselves together on something as simple as a common phone system and a
Right.
common advertising sales system, and we're doing you know uh, circulation customer support across a number of papers. So we're trying to find opportunities to sensibly consolidate some functions, business office support functions and billing and things like that, while still keeping news operations and local advertising sales operations in particular very, very much locally based, because those, um, I believe, and the Ogden newspaper company runs itself in a way that respects the need to keep those very locally based. They
Yeah.
have to reflect the local community, because you can't just like suck everything up into one regional newsroom and dole out like bland news that's sort of relevant. I mean, you can get away with it for a little while, I guess, but people catch on.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and you know whereof you speak because you come from a really long line of newspaper people. So uh, w- your family has newspapers in New Hampshire, right?
Yeah, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts. Yeah.
And so what brought you down to Maryland? I don't recall, actually. It's been a
Well,
while.
it was really the opportunity to work at a bigger paper in a bigger market, and to take some of what I had learned at the Concord Monitor, which is where I had been working most recently. We had been through some of the kind of downsizings and challenges related to the 2008, 2009, 2010 recession. We had kind
Hmm.
of weathered that in a way that I was able to. I was recruited for this job, and I could see that there was a lot that we had learned that I had learned there that could be applied here to help this paper out. At that time, they were going through a very difficult financial period, and needed somebody to come in with some outside ideas. So it was a great opportunity, and it's been just a fabulous community to come down to. So it's worked really well. But yeah, so I mean, I don't know, it's a curse or a blessing. I am, I guess, the fourth generation of my family. My family started in, I guess, 1886 was my great great grandfather.
Cool.
A great family story about taking over control of the paper in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and then that was the engine for a very small group of papers up in New England that has done great work. High quality work, but never sort of become a big chain or anything like that. But I do
Hmm.
remember, it's sort of like what's old is new again. I remember, my grandfather, who he was born in like 1902, something like that, and he was always the sort of the guy that I looked up to as being the ultimate representation of kind of community journalism. He was no rube. I mean, he was the head of he was the head of he was president of the Associated Press at one point. He was the head of he was
He
well
knew his
known
stuff.
throughout the industry. Yeah, even though he ran a relatively small paper in Western Massachusetts, but his whole focus was less on Woodward and Bernstein investigative reporting. It was more on get the names of everybody in the community in the paper as much as you can. He was really about, he was focused on an old school approach to community journalism that just was about getting the names and reflecting the accomplishments and achievements of people in the community. Even in a reasonable city with a 50,000 circulation paper, they were committed to the honor rolls and garden clubs and just
Mm-hmm.
as much as you could possibly do. And so that was the way he always ran the papers all through the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s. And then now I think that's the appreciation for that is kind of coming back as
Yeah, I
we
agree. It does feel like it's coming back around because the world can be so anonymous in some ways. And, the local journalism allows connections and, like an archive and like a permanence that I
yeah
think sometimes people are aching for. They just don't
yeah
realize that it's happening right in their backyard.
that's right. And especially to tie it back to what we were talking about, is the maybe this is there's a circular reference here, but the I talked about the new Frederick, old Frederick, and the people with ties in the community. We do see that and the News Post has had a long tradition of publishing like these photos of every garden club and check signing and everything else. And when I first came here, I kind of rolled my eyes at it, but you know that is that's very powerful,
Hmm.
and I see that like people talk about that, and people stop me in the street and they refer to these just the stuff of everyday life that we're able to get in there. It really matters. It's fun to see that, and it is those traditional community members and long-term community members that really respond to that. You just got to find that hook of interest and daily engagement to reach the entire community.
Right. Well, it sounds like there's still some work to do, and so it sounds like it's going to keep you busy for years to come. And I'm glad you have continued on your path of newspapering. And I'd love to just end with what keeps you in newspapers. You are so incredibly talented and have such a wonderful set of skills. You could go anywhere and have worked in other venues, but what keeps you in journalism?
Well, that's very kind of you. Um, I remember. So I had left journalism for a while, and I was working in the tech industry. I was working for Microsoft, and I remember when I gave my notice to my boss there, who was a director at Microsoft, and told him I was going back to work as a city editor at a community newspaper of 16,000 or whatever in New Hampshire. And I had been writing position papers for Steve Ballmer and stuff like this, and he was like completely, he just couldn't believe it. Like, what are you doing? I mean, this is that industry. That industry is falling apart. And this was in like 2000 or something like that, 2001, and he was incredulous. And but I remember like working as a cog in the Microsoft machine was lucrative and soul deadening. And when I came back to working in newspapers, um, there was both meaning and mission that's
Hmm.
central. I mean, yeah, whatever, we can go off and seek riches here and there, but this is a profession that gives you daily satisfaction if you can remain focused on how it matters to people and democracy and our communities. And I mean, that is real. And I think that matters more than almost anything else. And even in these days when, due to the challenges of the industry and the financial hardships, we're smaller and we have to work harder, but also that's fun too, right? We get to do more. And the same thing that I appreciated about leaving Microsoft, where I was just this one cog in a big machine, and I did one little thing over and over again. And it came to newspapers, and you got to do everything.
Hmm.
Um, and now that's even more true. So to me, that's both a blessing and a curse. It's harder to be good at everything. It's, you're stressed, it's tiring. But on the other hand, you get to do everything and you get to try everything. And the next day you can try something new. So as long as it's, challenging and you get to try new things, I can't think of a place I'd rather be.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, and I'm glad you're here. So thank
Well,
you
thank
so
you.
much for your work at the Frederick News Post and your support of the association as a past president and all of those good things. And I can't wait to hear more about what you have planned. So thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all you do for the industry here, Rebecca.
Oh, thank you.